Welcome back to My BrainWise Coach. We are extremely excited to bring you another episode. And today, as you can see, if you're watching us on YouTube or Spotify, we have a special guest with us to talk about a really cool topic. But before we dive into the content today, I just want to say we have successfully now launched, I think, 16 or 17 total episodes on our podcast. And we've had some really exciting engagement along the journey. We've gotten comments that have come in from many of our listeners. We've got a couple of emails of information or questions that people had. And we are truly enjoying this journey of really understanding ourselves through a neuroscience perspective. And so if you're enjoying this podcast, share it, like it, comment, subscribe to it wherever you get your podcasts. Send us questions to questions@mybrainwisecoach.com if you want to know more. And invite those in your circle, both professionally and personally, to listen along the journey to see what they too might be able to take away from the conversation and the information that we're sharing. But without further ado, let's dive into the content of today. So we have Cheryl Kish with us today, and I'm not going to attempt to introduce her credentials and her experience because it is a really amazing story, but she is a personal friend and mentor to me. I've known her for many years, and she has helped me along my life journey. And so I'm so honored that she's joined us. And Phil has known her even longer than I have. So Cheryl, welcome to My BrainWise Coach. Thank you for taking the time to share with our listeners today. Take a moment to introduce yourself and tell our listeners what you do and why you do it.
First of all, thank you, Cole. Thank you, Phil. So fun to be here with you guys to chat for the next 45 minutes or so. So thank you for inviting me. My name is Cheryl Kish. I am the president and founder of Define Consulting. Define Consulting is a boutique executive coaching and leadership development firm that helps organizations turn leadership potential into really measurable performance and people legacy. So we partner, Cole and Phil, with companies across industries from hospitality, restaurants to manufacturing, design, healthcare. And our focus is really to build cultures of trust, accountability, and collaboration. And of course, our work is grounded in neuroscience and behavioral research, but it's also deeply practical. So that's a little bit about Define Consulting.
Thank you so much for sharing. I personally have worked with you for a number of years and seen how just truly transformational the things that you do. And so I know our listeners are going to get a lot of really great information out of this. But before we dive into some more, I want to know, Cheryl and Phil, you've known each other for, 20 years possibly. Where did you guys meet and how did your friendship form? Because I think our listeners are starting to really connect with each of us personally. So I'd love to know a little bit about that story.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Phil, do you want to go or would you like me to go?
I'm happy to. We met in Las Vegas, and that sounds way more exciting than the reality. I bumped into Cheryl, and I think you had the role of transforming a culture in a large organization. And we started off working together doing that thing. I think the first thing you did was have a presentation to the board of directors, if I recall. And we've had a lifelong professional relationship and personal relationship since then. So I think that was 2005, somewhere around there. So it's probably 20 years.
That's right. I spent my early career inside organizations before I formed Define Consulting in hospitality, restaurants, hotels, and as Phil just mentioned, casinos. And I was brought in to help transform a tired old casino into a new brand. And it was a culture transformation. And I met Phil, and together we did mission and vision work with the board of directors. We worked with mission transition teams. This was a year-long process before we even rebranded and reopened that particular property. And over the years, Phil and I have worked together with various organizations. And so we've partnered and collaborated in this type of work where it's culture work, people transformation work, that sort of thing. So even though I started in operations, it's always people that has fascinated me, and connecting with Phil was a perfect fit to help me continue on that journey 20 years later.
That's an excellent transition. And thank you for sharing that story to where did you get your start, Cheryl? Because as the listeners are hearing, you've had a really amazing career over the last number of years, and to the point where you've started your own successful consulting firm. So where did you get your start, and tell us a little bit about that journey?
I could go way, way back, but as I've mentioned already, it was in operations. So I started in the hospitality industry when I was very young. And I did a good job. And I went into operations management. I ended up in training and development, which I loved and still do love. And eventually in human resources, and as a vice president of human resources, training, development, talent management inside a large organization. But what always fascinated me, as I said earlier, wasn't just operations or strategy, but people. Why some teams could do extraordinary things while others with the same resources just couldn't seem to connect. Over time, Cole and Phil, I realized that the common denominator was leadership, not just skill, but self awareness, communication, trust. And I found myself drawn to helping leaders build that kind of environment. So I took everything I'd learned from years of leading inside organizations, the successes, the mistakes, the real world complexity, and then founded Define Consulting in 2002. The goal was simple: help leaders and companies connect the human side of performance with the business results that they're trying to achieve. It was inside the hospitality industry, and now, as we've talked about, has expanded across industry.
No, that's perfect.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah,
What
please.
do you like most about being a coach?
Making it the transformational part. When an individual or a team experiences true transformation, that is most often life changing. So if I can help facilitate that, because as a coach, it's really about facilitating, but the answers lay within. So when an individual or a team can dig down deep and the coach can help pull out the answers that are already there, help people do something with that, make different choices, show up in a different way, get results that they're trying to achieve, that's what I enjoy most.
It's awesome. And Cheryl, with that, what is coaching? Since, that's a big part of what you do. What is coaching, and maybe what is it not?
Yeah, thank you. So coaching it's not therapy. It's not training, and it's not even mentoring. Coaching is to go alongside someone or a team, I'll say an individual at this point, and to be there to help that individual, again, look deep inside, have some self awareness if they don't already, maybe they don't, and to help connect what maybe they were not aware of in their non conscious that has been not serving them well, has perhaps been driving behavior that's not serving them well. Now, I will say, and we might get into this, that our non conscious beliefs, they do serve us well as well. But in coaching, it's pretty much when is it not serving you well, because it's about growth and moving forward. So coaching is let's move forward. Let's look at future state. Where are you current state? You guys have talked about this, right? And what's the plan to move forward to that desired future state for you as a leader, an individual, a team, whatever that might be. You might have some follow up there, Cole, but that's pretty much it in a nutshell. How we do that, there's a lot of obviously technique and modalities and different exercises the coach will do.
And I think it can be both in a professional context, because I think you've mentioned executive coaching, right, as a big part of what you do within your consulting firm. But then additionally, there's this kind of personal coaching or life coaching. So can you tell us a little bit about the difference between the two, and why someone might want coaching on either side, or maybe it ends up being a combined experience?
Yeah, for sure. So let's talk about the executive coaching first. Typically, in the executive coaching model, an organization, to be transparent, is paying for the coach's services, and the organization is wanting to provide support most often for high potential leaders that have been identified as having promise and potential. And now the company wants to pour more into and invest in that leader or those leaders. And it's most often, in my experience, because that leader is doing very well and the company wants to help that leader continue to move forward in that organization. Sometimes in executive coaching, executive coaches are brought in because there's a really strong leader, has done well up to a certain point, and we've all heard what got you here won't get you there. But that leader has hit a ceiling for whatever reason and is not progressing, but the company still believes in that leader. That leader has done well so far, but something is starting to get in the way. And so the coach is brought in to help that leader remove whatever it is, and so that they can move forward.
Mm-hmm.
With personal coaching, often it is someone reaches out on their own and says, I'm stuck. I feel stuck in my life, or I'm not sure of my direction, or I want to focus on being happier in my life or reaching my fullest potential. In my experience, it's been an individual will reach out. And I've done a lot of work in what I call transformational coaching. And that's where you help individuals visualize the best version of themselves in all areas of their life. And then through work, help them unblock whether it's beliefs or underlying commitments that are getting in the way of them actually achieving what they want in their life. Often, there is crossover in executive coaching. There is work in executive coaching where I help individuals realize again what might be going on in the background non-consciously that is getting them stuck so that they can move forward.
And I think for our BrainWise friends who are listening, I think one of the things to think about from your perspective and what Cheryl just said is, and we're going to do a little bit of a conversation here in a minute around mental models or worldviews, which we've talked a lot about on our podcast so far, Cheryl, and our listeners or our BrainWise friends were really engaged in that part of the conversation. But as you listen to what is being discussed, what are the things maybe from your perspective in your life, whether it's personally or professionally, are things going really well and want to boost in a particular area? Or is it, or struggling somewhere and having some additional guidance that allows you to think of things from an objective perspective and facilitate things, as Cheryl was talking about? Is there a space in your life where that might be something that you're looking for or that you might want to see to help you continue to grow? Because I think a big part of this is a lot of our listeners, Cheryl, are probably in a place where the personal coaching is something that is appealing for them as they move along their life's journey. And so we're going to give them, of course, a couple of little tidbits today that they can take away to begin doing some of that work. But then we'll, of course, always encourage, if there is a space where you feel like you're needing or you want to see some of that growth, what coaches are in your particular area that can help you along your life's journey.
So you've mentioned what goes on in the non-conscious brain. Could you give us a description of something you've done in the past to help an executive? Take us through a case study, for example, and also if we can then unpack it and take a look at what's going on in the non-conscious side.
Sure, I'd love to. Of course, all names, right, change situations, but every so often in coaching, you meet a leader who seems to have it all figured out, right? Sharp, strategic, capable. And then you realize the very strengths that built their success are the same ones quietly getting in their way. And that was true for, let's say, Scott. Scott was a senior vice president, fast-growing organization, brilliant mind, disciplined, deeply respected for his results. But when his CEO recommended executive coaching, his response was, I remember, sure, if it helps my team perform at my level. And then that told me, Cole and Phil, everything that I needed to know. And so as we began working together, we uncovered what I call Scott's mental models, those deeply held, often unconscious beliefs that shape how we see the world. They drive our behaviors, our reactions, and sometimes our blind spots. 3 of Scott's stood out for me. The first was, if I don't control it, it won't get done, right? The second was, emotion clouds judgment. And the third, respect is earned by competence, not connection. Now, yeah. So these beliefs had served him beautifully in the early stages of his career. They made him reliable, efficient, and precise, but they also created this unintended pattern, a tendency to over control, detach when things got emotional, and equate vulnerability with weakness. But that's an example of how you might work with one and start to realize that things that got me to where I'm at are also getting in my way.
And so when you facilitated that with him, and he did it, was it you that pointed it out, or did he see that himself?
He saw it himself. I call it the life story exercise. Highly confidential, sacred ground. But I interviewed Scott and interviewed him through his entire life story from the earliest that he could remember to present day. And then the next step in my process, I try to get word for word as Scott shares his story. But the next step in this exercise is for me as his coach, as Scott listens, is for me to read in his words his life story back to him. Now, this takes several sessions. And I asked Scott or the coachee, right, as they're listening, jot down or ask me to pause if something really resonates with you as you listen back, right? What are the reoccurring themes? And so that's the process. And it is the coachee, it was Scott, as he would share back with me, wow, it really seems like when X was happening early in my life, this was happening, and it caused me to have this need for control. There's something about control and fear of not having control. No, it's not me identifying. Now, I am there to support, and if Scott were to perhaps miss something that I, as his coach, feel and want to suggest we should explore further, then certainly I will bring that up, and together we'll explore that further.
Yeah. And I can say, Cheryl, you and I actually did that mental models work together. You were my coach, still are in a number of ways, but it was really powerful. I've actually shared on our podcast a couple of my mental models, but one is I have to be the best, and then how I reframed it to my best is good enough. And I can only imagine the conversation with Scott as you were going along that conversation with him. I think people are going to want to know, how did Scott's story end, right?
Yeah.
But then once we're done telling that, what's a small way that maybe our BrainWise friends can apply the same mental models process in their own life? Maybe there's a quick activity they can do to identify some of those non-conscious belief systems, mental models, or worldviews for themselves. But first, let's talk about, how did Scott's story end? Where did it go, and how did it end positively, we hope?
Yes, it does, and it continues to. Scott and I explored what triggered these beliefs around control and weakness. For example, so it's starting to identify the triggering, and when the beliefs, first of all, now they've become what was non-conscious now becomes more conscious. So when a deadline slipped, he would tighten control. When someone pushed back, he would shut down empathy. When a mistake happened, his tone would grow sharp because respect in his mind was still linked to flawless performance. But he started to see it. And that's what we would hope for in coaching, the ripple effect. His intensity made his team hesitant. People stopped bringing forward half-formed ideas. They were afraid they'd never be right enough. Performance stayed steady, but innovation flatlined. So we went to work, and you've already mentioned the reframe word, reframing those beliefs. So instead of, if I don't control it, it won't get done right, Scott tried on, if I coach clarity and accountability, others can own results with me. Instead of emotion clouds judgment, he reframed to, emotion is data. It tells me what matters. And instead of respect is earned by competence, not connection, he adopted, connection builds the trust that allows competence to shine.
Wow.
Yeah. And the changes started small, but before meetings, he would pause and ask himself, what story am I bringing in? He'd slow down. He'd use communication models that we practiced. He would use emotional intelligence skills that we had been working on. He would start simple one-on-ones check-in, but it was remarkable. So to end the story, his team started mirroring his own calm tone. Conversations became more open, and he started being described as steady. What I love about Scott's story is nothing changed around him. Scott chose to change.
And is that a recent story, or does that go back a few years?
This one is fairly recent, I'd say in the last 8 months.
Oh, wow.
Um, I will say this though, change doesn't happen overnight. And what I described, this self-awareness part, takes several months of work to even get there, and the reframing. And then the hard work begins once you understand what's triggering you. And we should talk about the PTP as well, because that's very helpful in this process. Then it takes months of work for an individual to, now it's in the conscious brain, but it's still hard. I have to think about it as naturally until it does become more natural. But it's work.
And you've mentioned a couple of things about it becoming out of the non-conscious into the conscious. And one of the things we know about change is you can't do work with one or the other. You have to do work with the both. So Cheryl, you've mentioned a couple of things en route that I just want to make certain that our BrainWise listeners get to understand it maybe a little more deeply. You mentioned emotional intelligence. You've mentioned a PTP. Can you explain what emotional intelligence is in just a few sentences?
Yeah. So emotional intelligence, there's really 4 aspects of it. One is self-awareness and my ability to manage what I am self-aware of. So that's self. The other side is others, right? And so being aware of what's going on with others' emotions, but also being able to manage appropriately the emotions of others so that there is positive, whatever interaction is happening. I might be aware and self aware, but what am I doing about it? How am I managing that? I might be aware of how others are reacting, what emotions they're experiencing, but how am I adjusting myself to manage the best outcome with others?
So what I'm hearing is that a really basic, maybe this is so obvious, a fundamental starting point is self-awareness for pretty
Yes,
much everything. How do you as a coach help someone become self-aware?
sure. I love what you said. It starts with self awareness, know thyself. I always say, how could we possibly lead others if we cannot lead ourselves? Whether that's in our home, our community, our families, and certainly in the workplace. So it starts with self awareness. What's going on with me? How are my behaviors and how I show up, my personal and professional brand, because that's what others see, right? Am I showing up in a way that is in alignment with my values, with the organization's values, to drive the results I'm trying to drive? Again, whether with my family, the team, the organization. I can't possibly, if I'm not, first, I might think I'm showing up a certain way, but others are perceiving I'm showing up another way. So truly understanding how I'm showing up, the perception by others, and then doing the work to understand why I might be showing up that way, my belief systems, my mental models, and my threat triggers, which are going to put me into this state, as you guys, as our BrainWise listeners know, this state of fear and threat versus this state of safety and comfort. And all of that is going to have an impact on how ourselves and the others around us. I don't think I answered your question quite yet, but there's many different ways through assessments, the mental models work. There's emotional intelligence assessments. There's the personal threat profile assessment. There's the mental models work, which I've already mentioned. 360s are getting the perspective of others, but it might be a scary thing, but I might think I'm showing up one way and I realize there's trends and themes in how others are seeing me show up. So I look at all of these different assessments or the assessment phase as data points to help me or help an individual put together the pieces of the puzzle that is their internal drivers that are driving how they show up to the rest of the world. The iceberg model, right? You guys might, I don't know if you've shared that in previous podcasts, but what do others see above the waterline versus what's driving all of that below the water?
Right. And I'm guessing, I'm going back to your story about Scott, but I'm guessing that if he could see all those different things as data, that would have be a way for him to use his strength in terms of how to become more self-aware.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. Personal threat profile. You've mentioned that a couple of times. Could you double click on that for us?
I feel like I should just throw that one right back at you, Phil.
We could play tennis here for a while, but it'd be interesting. If I describe it, it's going to take me 2 hours. You describe it, maybe a lot simpler.
There's this fabulous assessment called the Personal Threat Profile, first developed by the Oxford Brain Institute. And it's a validated assessment where you take the assessment, and at the end of it, an individual that takes it, they're going to get a report that's going to show, 47 different
47
different threats, threat triggers, things that could threaten the brain. And so we're able to debrief with a client, with the coachee, where their highest threat triggers are. For example, I have a very high need, I've learned, for autonomy. And so if autonomy is threatened in the workplace or even at home, then I'm going to perhaps react in a way that I don't want to react, but that's just my fear. That's my non-conscious brain kicking in, right? That instinctive. So the more we can help individuals understand what is triggering the threat, emotional threat, not necessarily physical threat, then they can connect that with their mental models. There's often huge connection there, and we can understand, oh, this isn't really a threat. This is a story I'm making up right now that I've made it bigger than it actually is, right? I think, okay, I wasn't invited to this meeting. So there's, this is an example. So there's a executive meeting taking place. 2/3 of the executive team are invited behind closed doors, and Cheryl's not invited to that particular meeting. And Cheryl goes off, I'm making this up, but it's maybe true, right? And then Cheryl goes off to her office. And why was I not invited to that meeting? What decisions are going to be made that could impact me and my team in that meeting? Why is my opinion not being asked in that meeting? And so all these things might go on in my head, which simply are not true. It's just a meeting where my expertise was not needed at the time. My time was more valuable somewhere else. But these are the types of things that happen. So I'll pause there because I'd love for your color commentary, Phil and Cole. And hopefully I got it right.
So first of all, 100%, you get an A and you get a star, and you can.
That's important to me too because I'm very high in perfection.
Yeah, so that's why I didn't even say 99%. I said 100%. No, that's a really good description, and it ties it in to what's going on and gives some great examples. And I think one of the things we've talked about in the past is our brain's ability to what we call MSU, make stuff up.
I get it.
And you did some great examples. They may have been meeting to basically determine what level of bonus they wanted to give you. Right. And so we never know what's going on, and we project, and that often comes from our fears.
That's right. And on the MSU part, if I may, this is something that might be helpful for BrainWise listeners at home. This was an exercise that way back when I was going through some certification in transformational coaching, but this MSU part where we get ourselves all just in this state. And for some, it can be paralyzing. So the exercise was write down everything you believe to be going on about X experience. Write it down. Then take a yellow highlighter and highlight the facts, only the facts that can be proven or disproven. How much of what you have written down is highlighted versus is not? Because what's not highlighted is MSU. The brain has made it up. And it's a very helpful exercise. So that's just something small that you can try at home. It has worked wonders for me when we can live in the facts and not all the fears and the triggers going on in the non-conscious brain that we may or may not be aware of.
That's a way of bringing it into the conscious. And I love that simple exercise. It's really good.
Yeah, it's great. And I think it's a good segue into, we've talked a lot about, or you've shared this mental models process and how transformative it can be for individuals. And how it connects to their self-awareness. And one of the things that we try to do is give our BrainWise friends some takeaways and some nuggets they can use on their own, which just gave them one around making, how can they do maybe a lighter version or an independent version of a mental models process or life story or something similar in their own life to begin to uncover what might be driving some of how they're showing up in their conscious brain.
I think a simple way to start is to do an exercise, again, writing down or recording oneself or whatever, and look back in blocks of time. So the first block of time would be, I was born in Fort Belvoir, Virginia, whatever. I would describe my mom as, I would describe my dad as, whatever you can remember, however you would describe them. And then you start to look at roles, right? So some people refer to it as family of origin, but what role did, each parent play? What role did I play? Then we start looking at, okay, there's these blocks of time of preschool, which most people can't really remember anything. Some people can. And what are key takeaways from that time? And then you go to elementary school and anything you can remember about social, family, and vivid, more pivotal sorts of memories, right? And then always ask yourself after each block of time, what might my key lessons or takeaways? What was I learning during that time in my life? When you go through junior high, and then it's perhaps college and even early career, and then looking back over one's life, what am I most proud of? What am I most disappointed in? What do I hope the future holds? If you can get that written down and then go through it and just begin again, take a highlighter or notes, what seems to be reoccurring. Now, I do recommend having a partner actually do it with you, as I described earlier, because hearing it back in your own words, not having to be the one writing it down, is more powerful because you can get more in your heart and not so much in your head if you have a partner that is doing that with you, someone that you trust and would want to share. And I always tell my coachees, the clients, you are meant to say, you are going to say what you are meant to say. There's no right or wrong. You're going to share what you're meant to share. That's maybe an exercise that folks might want to try at home.
I think it's powerful. And I think having the partner or coach is a significant addition to the experience because it also allows you to uncover things that maybe you're blocking yourself from being able to uncover by them asking the right facilitated questions. But I think it's a great small starting point for our BrainWise friends to say, okay, what does my life story look like? And where are those themes that I may be showing up or I have a belief of a certain thing? And I think one of the things we talked about, Cheryl, during our work on that was it served me well up into a point, right? And now there's an opportunity where it's not serving me well anymore. And so what does the reframe now look like?
That's exactly right. That would be the second part of the exercise. So if one is able to go through this identification process and say, we'll go back to Scott's high need for control because it's the only way things are going to get done. The next step I say to Scott is, okay, Scott, we're going to draw a line in the middle of the page. This need for control, or else it won't be right. I must control it or it will not be right. It's the only way it will be. How has that served you well? Has it not served you well? And Scott actually lists, right? So you actually list, it has served me very well. I have done excellent work. I have gotten promoted. I have been in charge of my destiny, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, Scott, how has this belief not served you? And equally, the person can come up with, it's caused this, it's caused this, it's causing this. That's the work that we want, coaches want to do with an individual is, okay, continue to let, that belief's not going anywhere necessarily, but you have to reframe it so that the negativity of it and the part where it's not working for you can be reframed to allow yourself grace for it to show up in a way that only serves you, if that makes sense.
Right.
A couple of things I'd say is, so yes, it's orders of magnitude better if you can have a partner work with you. However, you need that partner to have certain characteristics, because many people will listen and then turn it about their life story rather than yours. Just when you choose a partner, if you're not going to choose a professional coach, when you choose a partner, then look for somebody who's going to be in support of you, not turn it to their story.
So your partner really says nothing except ask the questions.
There we go.
Where were you born? Tell me about each parent. Tell me about each parent's role. Tell me about your role. That's all the partner's doing. No commentary from the partner.
There we go. Yeah.
Pause and be quiet as a partner and let that person say as much before you ask the next question.
And the other thing I want to check with you, Cole, is that if anybody wants to take this exercise and do it, can we send them a portion of the transcript, which will actually just outline what the exercise consists of?
Yeah, it'll actually be in the show notes as a
Great.
part of the excerpt and the key takeaways. And then there's also a newsletter that goes out on Wednesdays recapping the conversation. It'll be there also. And I think one of the other things is just a quick mention or highlight. If you're married or in a relationship with someone, highly suggest that you don't be the partner that does the work with your spouse or your significant other.
Endorse that.
Yeah. All three of us on here are coaches, and sometimes I find myself with my husband getting in a space of playing coach when I need to just be spouse, and it never works out well. So just from a personal experience perspective, you can help your spouse and you can help each other with a lot of things, but in this particular vein, highly suggested someone that is not your significant other.
And could I just throw something in too? Because listeners might be going, okay, this sounds a bit like therapy. Coaching is about moving forward. Now, identifying current state, we do sometimes, this mental models piece is, yes, we're going to add some questions to go back, but it's only to bring these beliefs into the conscious. We're not trying to fix anything. We're not trying to heal anything, grief or experiences. That's for a therapist. The other thing that I want listeners to be clear on is this work gets done for a reason. It's because these beliefs are driving how we show up in our behaviors. It's like, I often will say, it's like getting on a treadmill. We wake up in the morning, we get on that treadmill, and we just go without even thinking about it. And we do not push the pause or stop button often enough to even say, where am I going? How am I getting there? And am I getting there in the way that I want to get there and show up? So that's how most of us are. We're on this auto and we don't even think about it. So this part happens in the beginning so we can bring it into the conscious. Now the hard work begins. And some people might be going, what does that have to do with business? What does it have to do with, I've hired an executive coach to help me be a better leader, to help me move my team to hit organizational results or business results. Remember I said, know thyself first, and then you got to know others in order to lead others, in order to drive the future state and align and move together. So there is very much business performance that comes into play in executive coaching, individual, team, and organizational performance component to it. I just wanted to make that clear because some people might say, oh, this sounds soft and fluffy. What does that have to do with driving results?
And I think the other thing too is for those who may be feeling that or thinking that, a lot of times it comes with the territory of discussing the life story, but we all try to say that, okay, we're going to separate my personal from professional, but that's really just an anecdote. It's not reality. Very often and most of the time, who we are in our personal lives carries into, we don't have two different identities, right? We just have ourselves and we're carrying ourselves there. And so those belief systems that are coming with us are going to drive the results or lack thereof in our professional context. And while it may sound okay that's on the side of the personal or the, as you were describing it, softer, it is driving those professional behaviors and driving the things that are either getting results or not getting results from an organizational perspective, especially as a leader. And so the two are so intertwined because we're one being. Now, one day we're going to talk about multiple characters because I can sure see Phil's brains, the sparks flying off. But we're going to reserve that for another conversation. So stay tuned when we talk about multiple characters because we may have different ways of showing up, but we are just one person, right? Unless you're Mr. Hyde and Dr. Jekyll from that cartoon story. But I'd like to transition next, Cheryl, to one of the things that we've heard a little bit about that you've shared is there's personal coaching, executive coaching, but then there's also some work that can be done with teams. And I think this can be both from the team in the context of business, right? And how that work can be done. But then I would encourage our BrainWise friends to think about it that from that perspective, especially if you're a manager or you're on a team, but then also how can you use that at home? Because there's a lot of parallels in teamwork and work at home?
Yeah, absolutely. So part of what Define Consulting does is we work with organizations, go inside organizations, and we work to help leaders grow. And so we will often come in and help create curriculum for leadership development programs. These are it could be from frontline, new emerging leaders, all the way, as I mentioned, the high potential leaders to executive teams and offsite and strategy and becoming more aligned as an executive team. So when we talk about awareness, I'll just think right now I'm working with a fabulous organization and for a couple of years now and working at different team levels. So working at the emerging leader, frontline team level, working with a mid-level team level, and started out working at the executive team level. But I believe your question was around how do we help these teams become more self-aware? Is that right?
Yeah, how do we help these teams become more self-aware, or how do we help them
Yeah.
become more effective in being a team?
So regardless of what level the team or the leadership team is, it's understanding. I'm going to go back to self-aware. So we do some work early in the curriculum about understanding the brain. Now, depending on the level leader, depends on how deep we're going to go. This isn't a clinical sort of thing, but it's having to understand, and they get it and they love it, because if you can help these, I'll just say new leaders right now, understand that the brain's number one function is for safety. And so, what's going on within them. And then you always want to have the applicability to how this is in the workplace, what might trigger threat in themselves, what sorts of things. And then you start helping those leaders understand then how do they impact that either safety within others, right? The psychological safety or fear and threat. There's a lot of work done. And I always introduce emotional intelligence. Phil mentioned it earlier, and I have found it doesn't matter. These first time frontline leaders, they get it. They love it. They come back and they say, this has helped me at home. I have a group, it's their second year coming back for another level of learning. And one gentleman said to me, he goes, my wife is so happy that I'm coming back for round 2 of this curriculum. Because he has become more self-aware and understanding what's going on. And we do a lot around communication and effective communication and creating alignment and all those sorts of things. So I'm not sure if I've gone off track here maybe a little bit in what you originally asked me, but
It's perfect. I think it's perfect because one is, as a leader in a team, we have to be aware of how we're showing up so that we can then have a better outcome and team involvement. And then there's other team effectiveness types of activities that can be done to help improve it. But it always starts with ourselves. And I think as we think about it, as you were just describing for the at home part, where the gentleman, he's showing up better at home and his wife wants him to come back for part 2, I would encourage our BrainWise friends to think about it from your perspective at home. You've heard us talk about emotional intelligence, mental models. You've heard us talk about communication. How am I showing up at home? What am I doing that's serving my relationship and my family well? And then where are there things that I maybe have some opportunity for continued improvement? Because there are so many parallels between how we show up and what we do with teams at work to then the same thing at home. It becomes just different topics of conversation a lot of times, but there is a lot of parallels.
And a lot of times I mentioned assessments earlier with all these different data points, whether I'm a fan of strength finders. I've already mentioned the PTP, emotional intelligence, something as easy as emotional intelligence 2.0, which is a great program. The Thomas Kilmann instrument on conflict styles is one. And I've had leaders go through these different workshops or sessions through our different programs and then say, oh, I want to have my and they've taken it home and had family members with their kids even take strength finders or their wives, or they'll take the results and say, and they'll have these really wonderful discussions with their significant others and their families about that. And then communication models that we teach, influencing models, creating alignment, all of those sorts of things. I always say what I learn here, I can take everywhere. And that's a philosophy that we have, especially when you're talking about these really life-changing skills inside intact teams and organizations or inside your own team within your home or community.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things we talked about, Cheryl, early on is that one of the probably attributes or characteristics that you've helped individual leaders and even teams to some extent, but from the leader perspective, grow is within confidence and executive presence or leadership presence. So can you tell us a little bit about that? Why does confidence seem to be a recurring theme oftentimes? And then how do you help them to be able to improve it?
So interesting because I can go back 20, 30 years and it still keeps coming up, this term executive presence, gravitas, confidence, whatever it is. And what we know is that all things equal, skill, everything else, it is those leaders who are able to show up in a way that exudes confidence, this presence, which is elusive, right? Really, when you look at describing it, those leaders tend to get promoted over those who do not have that skill. I believe it can be learned. Some say fake it till you make it. I've worked with several individuals and they'll say, I need to develop more confidence. I don't feel confident. When somebody doesn't believe they are confident, they are going to show up in a way that others go, she's not showing up very confidently. And that's going to be through our body language, the way we're able to get the message out, articulate a message, all those sorts of things that we know. So the work to be done with an individual is, let's get to the core of what's your belief system. What is it that is creating this lack of confidence within you? So that's there. The other thing is to do work. I do a lot of work in helping leaders with their executive presence. And that is really teaching. It really is skills. What are your presentation and facilitation skills? What are they? The ones that are very impactful. And then it's teaching those skills, practicing. We use video, it's played back, there's feedback, but it is phenomenal. Even in a 2-day or a day and a half, you can take a baseline of where somebody is when they first walk in to where they walk out. And it is phenomenal if certain techniques are used. So there's skills, even if somebody doesn't feel confident inside still, for whatever reason, because we're not doing mental models work during those exercises, I can still practice pausing, eye contact, and things like that. That whatever it's triggering, Phil, you'll have to name it for me. In others, wow, she must be really sure of herself. But I could be sitting here right now not sure of myself at all.
Yeah. And I was going to ask you, Phil, from a neuroscience perspective, how do we help our BrainWise friends after what we just heard from Cheryl around building confidence and executive presence? What are some takeaways that we can give them from a BrainWise lens?
So a couple of things. One, you mentioned pausing. And yet many people have a mental model that says, if I pause, someone's going to jump in. Or if I pause, it indicates I don't know what I'm doing. And yet the power of that pause is incredible. But our brains want to fill it up. One of my heroes, Winston Churchill, knew that the pauses in a speech were just as important as the words he said. We've got a mental model where we want to fill things up, especially if we're under pressure or stress, because we tend to not have that prefrontal cortex coming to control what's going on, and we revert to old behaviors. So part of what you're talking about is for that person that wants to demonstrate more confidence, and you build in a process by which they can do it. Now, how do you get it to be a habit for them? That takes us straight into creating new habits. Right. And I can go on for another 2 hours if you want, but that's not what we're about.
Maybe not. Maybe we'll come back and we'll do an episode on the neuroscience of confidence or something, because I think it does continue to be an interesting conversation. It shows up in a lot of places. And Cheryl, you and I have worked with many leaders together within an organization, and it was something that showed up all the time. That confidence was the thing that people needed to build, that they were struggling with. And then when they found it and they found their voice, the effort or the results on the other side were just incredible, both at home and at work. They began to see just a different paradigm shift because they were showing up in a more confident way, not arrogance, because a lot of times you can mask your lack of confidence if masked as arrogance, but truly believing in yourself. And sometimes that is also being able to say, I don't know, and being confident and being able to say that and not feeling like people are going to look at you like you're not intelligent because you don't know something. But I think, Phil, I see a brain spark coming off. I'm going to start calling them your BrainWise sparks.
My BrainWise sparks. I'm not sure they're always wise, but they are sparks.
Don't start a fire or anything like that.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
A couple of things. One, we've got to be a little bit careful because sometimes confidence and competence need to go hand in hand.
Yes.
And so if you become too confident and you don't grow your competence at the same time, that's when you end up in the derailing situation that you were talking about earlier on.
I love that you say that. May I add a third C? Comfort, competence, and confidence. And I think with competence, then comes comfort, then comes confidence. And so we'll just take the workshop I mentioned on building your facilitation presentation skills. Let's teach the skills and help you become competent, right? You become more comfortable through practice. And then you see the confidence coming more naturally because I've approached it this way. And you're exactly right. You can overcompensate and it comes off as arrogance, or people see right through it because you might be sending a message, but there's not any meat to that message or whatever it is. So, yeah, I love that.
Do you think is a great segue into the wrap up question, which is what excites you, Cheryl, about the coaching field and ultimately being able to continue giving back to those that are coming up into the workforce?
Yeah, thank you. What excites me most is working with Phil, you, Cole, the BrainWise side of things, really ensuring that in the coaching field that there is a neuroscience approach to how coaching is taking place. And we're always learning new things, right? Phil, our researcher, is always sharing, but really helping people understand what's going on in self. There's a science side to this. I think it helps ground people on the coaching side and helps them really accelerates the work that can be done when going through coaching or as coaches as we're coaching. The other thing that excites me, and I don't quite know where it's going quite yet, but there needs to be something around this, is our younger generations, not to call out certain generations, but those who are new in the workforce, maybe struggling to find jobs, struggling to be successful in the workforce, and then those who will be entering the workforce. I don't know the answer to this, but I'm going to work on it, right? You guys will help me. Is what can we do to help prepare these individuals for success in whatever that work environment's going to look like? And that's a whole nother conversation for another day, is what work environment, the ever-changing work environment. But young people are struggling. Some are, but I think there's work to be done there.
For sure.
I actually think that's probably a really good topic for us to pick up in sometime in the future. Maybe we invite you back and we have a couple of other people will have a panel on what's going on and what we can do about it.
I would love that.
Wonderful. One of the things we always do, Cheryl, at the end of our sessions is we talk about some reflection. And then usually I am the one that gives most of the questions. Phil's joked I've always had 100. He always adds a few too. So it's not just me. But if you could summarize in your own words what we've talked about today, and then maybe give our BrainWise friends 3 questions that they can use to reflect on personally what they've heard in the episode today that might be able to help them as they go along their life's journey.
Sure. So the first thing that comes to mind is ask yourself, be honest with yourself, allow yourself to hear the answer from within. What is working for me in my life and what is not working for me in my life? Whether that is at home, at work, or both. The second one that comes to mind is what feedback have I received that I perhaps am not acting upon? Or if I have not received feedback, who should I go ask for some feedback on how I am showing up? And the third is, I always say this, define consulting, right? Become very clear on who you want to be what legacy you want to leave, your personal, professional brand. What do you want people to say and believe about you? And then ask yourself, am I showing up in a way that would create those beliefs? So those are my three.
I love it. It's perfect. It's a great way to summarize.
Perfect.
Yeah. And our BrainWise friends are probably going, wait a minute, they didn't do their BrainWise or Brain Unwise moment from the week early on in our episode today. So we're going to truncate at the end this time. We're going to switch it up a little bit. So I'll kick us off, and I'll give Phil and Cheryl the opportunity to think about your BrainWise or your Brain Unwise moment from the week. I would say mine this past week was yesterday. One of the things that has our BrainWise friends know is I'm in the midst of a fairly big professional transition, coming out of an organization for a long period of time, still supporting in the final stages. But yesterday there was a kind of a point of finality, knowing, okay, this is when the date's going to be, this is when my transition work is going to be complete. And there were several emotions, several things that came up. One, okay, great, now I know when the final part is going to be. But then also there was this kind of emotional moment of grief to say, there's something I'm also losing. Even though I've known about it for a number of months now, it became more clear and more evident that this is when it's going to happen. And so my BrainWise moment is I allowed myself to take the moment to have a moment of grief or to feel whatever I needed to feel, but not allow myself to live in that space. So then I got up and I decided to go ahead and do a little bit of baking. I didn't eat it all though, so that's a good moment too. I could add that in there. But I did something productive with the time. So that way I was focused on something positive. So I gave myself the moment to grieve. I then transitioned to something positive, and then it ultimately helped me to have a much more productive and pleasant experience throughout the rest of the day. So that was mine. Cheryl, you want to go next? Or Phil? Who wants to go first?
I'll share so for me this week, it's been focus on self, which is often in coaching, right? It's helped. The coachee is not focusing or taking care of self, but I am very consciously and purposefully focusing on my health, my sleep, what time I'm going to bed, what I'm doing before I go to bed, what I'm putting in my body. Because I know as a coach that you have to take care of yourself before you can take care of others, but that doesn't mean we always do that. And what I'm experiencing is, even in a very short amount of time, with mindfulness and intentionality, you can shift with the right sleep, the right nutrition. So that's my BrainWise moment, is to practice what one preaches.
I love it. Very good. Phil?
I'm actually going to talk about two. And one is, we never know the impact we have on others. And so this was something that dawned on me yesterday, but actually occurred a week ago. I won't go into all the details, but I was at a situation where I saw somebody that I hadn't seen for about 3 or 4 months. And I walked up and said, I'll call him Bob. So that's not his name, but that's what I'll call him. So I went up to Bob and I said, how are you? And we had a brief 5-minute conversation. And then I had to run. I had to go to a meeting. Forward to yesterday, when I was at another meeting, and the two people I was meeting with related how much that 5 minutes that I spent with this gentleman had meant to him. And so just, hey, take an extra couple of minutes and go and say hi to that person that you haven't spoken to for a while. You don't know the level of impact that you are actually having. So that was one of my moments. The other one was first thing this morning. Our observers may have noticed that I tend to wear button-down shirts most of the time. I'm now 75 years old, and I'm starting to get a little bit of arthritis. And buttoning these shirts now is way more difficult. Mm-hmm. And so I was thinking about it, and I went, wait a minute. Here's a habit. Because what it comes from is growing up. This is a mental model. Growing up, my first probably 15 years in the workplace was to wear a tie. And in order to have a tie effectively, you have to put it around your neck and then button this down. But I don't have to wear it anymore as I button it down. I can do it when it's lying in front of me. And so that was a sort of practical habit that I just shot in the head this morning.
Or you could start wearing shirts with collars that aren't buttoned down.
Could do that.
Or the
too.
snap buttons, the ones that snap versus you have to put through the hole.
But there's lots of ways of reframing this.
Right. Yes, and I would say you're 75 years young. That's
Okay.
what I would say.
I
You
appreciate
look
that.
fabulous, Phil. Both of you do. You've been such great mentors and leaders in my life. So I just want to say thank you, Cheryl, for joining us on our podcast today. I know our BrainWise friends are going to have a tremendous amount of takeaways as they listen today, both personally and professionally, based off of your experience, the work that you do. And if anyone wanted to get into contact with you, how would they go about doing so?
Yeah, thank you. Cheryl, Cheryl, at defineconsulting.com. DEFINE consulting.com. Awesome. Thank you so much, Phil.
Yeah,
Well,
you're
very
thanks
welcome.
for joining.
And thank you for the contribution. I know we did a little bit of practice beforehand, but went in all sorts of directions that we could never have predicted.
No,
Thank
it
you.
was great. Thanks for joining. And BrainWise friends, thanks for joining us today on another episode of My BrainWise Coach, where we really talked about the intersection of neuroscience, coaching, and personal development. So stay tuned as we continue our journey of understanding ourselves through a neuroscience lens. And if you enjoyed our podcast, comment, subscribe, and share this with those in your circle so they too can begin to live in a more brainwise fashion. As always, stay compassionate, stay curious, and stay brainwise.